Hey guys, we know you love these long 20-story videos and we love the feedback we get. However, it takes a while for our small team to make them. That's why we've moved over to a new channel, Wideawakehorror Extended, just for our long stories with a bigger team, and we will be uploading the longer stories from that channel from now on. So guys, please head over to our new channel and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new videos. The channel link will be in the video description and in the comments. Let's try and hit 1,000 subs on our new channel. I know you legends can get us there. And when we upload, comment that you're from the original Wide Awake Horror channel so we can appreciate you as one of the OG members. Thank you so much for being part of the Wide Awake Horror family. We hope to see you on our new channel. We love you guys.
I'd been single for a while, and my friends kept bugging me to get back out there. Little did I know I was about to step into a whirlwind of deception that would leave my head spinning. As I scrolled through profiles, one caught my eye. Hester. She was gorgeous, long, dark hair, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. Her bio was witty and clever, mentioning her love for adventure and trying new things. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched instantly. We started chatting, and man, it felt like we clicked right away. Hester had a story for everything. She told me about backpacking through Europe, rescuing stray animals, and her job as a high-powered executive at a tech startup. I was completely smitten. Her messages were always perfectly timed, her jokes landed just right, and she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of nonstop messaging, we decided to meet up for coffee. I arrived at the cafe early, nervously fidgeting with my phone. When Hester walked in, I felt my heart skip a beat. She looked beautiful, but something felt off. Her hair was a different shade than in her photos, and her features seemed slightly different. I chalked it up to filters and lighting, not wanting to jump to conclusions. As we started talking, I noticed more discrepancies. She mentioned growing up in California, but I distinctly remembered her profile saying she was from New York. When I brought it up, she quickly changed the subject, launching into a story about a wild night out in Tokyo. Throughout our date, her stories seemed to contradict each other, and she avoided giving specific details about her life. Despite the nagging feeling in my gut, I agreed to a second date. We met at a trendy restaurant downtown. This time, Hester looked even less like her profile pictures. Her hair was shorter, and she seemed shorter too. When I asked about her recent trip to Bali that she'd mentioned in our chats, she looked confused for a moment before launching into a vague story about beaches and temples. After the date, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I decided to do some digging, starting with a reverse image search of her profile pictures. What I found shocked me. The photos weren't of Hester at all. They belonged to a fashion blogger from London with over 1 million Instagram followers. My heart racing, I dug deeper. I searched for traces of Hester online, but nothing came up. No social media accounts, no LinkedIn profile, nothing. It was like she didn't exist outside of the dating app. I started to piece things together. The witty comments in her bio, I found them word for word on various Twitter accounts, her travel stories, lifted from popular travel blogs. Even her job description was fabricated, copied from a tech company's website. I felt sick to my stomach. The person I've been talking to for weeks, the one I'd started to develop feelings for, didn't exist. Hester was nothing more than a carefully crafted persona, built from stolen pieces of other people's lives. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I created a fake profile on the dating app. I used photos of a male model and filled the bio with witty quotes I found online. Within hours, I matched with Hester. She used the exact same opening line she'd used on me. I played along, chatting with her for a few days. Her stories were the same ones she'd told me, with slight variations. When I suggested meeting up, she agreed enthusiastically, just like before. On the day of the date, I arrived at the cafe early and waited. A woman walked in, looking around nervously. She was nothing like the photos on Hester's profile. She was older, heavier, with graying hair and tired eyes. When she approached my table, I knew it was her. "Hester," I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She froze, recognition flashing in her eyes. Without a word, she turned and hurried out of the cafe. I sat there stunned as the full weight of the deception hit me. I reported her profile to the dating app, providing evidence of her stolen photos and fabricated stories. Her account was quickly removed, but I couldn't help wondering how many other fake profiles were out there, preying on lonely hearts like mine. The whole experience left me feeling foolish and betrayed. I always thought I was too smart to fall for something like this, but Hester's deception was so well crafted that I never saw it coming. It made me question every interaction I'd had online. I took a break from dating apps after that, focusing on meeting people in real life instead. The incident with Hester taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of trusting my instincts and being more cautious online. Months later, I decided to give online dating another shot. This time, I approached it with a healthy dose of skepticism. I made sure to video chat with matches before meeting in person and paid closer attention to inconsistencies in their stories. I sometimes wonder about the real person behind Hester's profile. What motivated her to create such an elaborate fake persona? Was she lonely, insecure, or did she have more sinister intentions? I'll probably never know the truth. In the end, my dating app horror story changed the way I approach online interactions. I'm more cautious now, but I haven't let it make me cynical. Instead, I've learned to balance optimism with reality, always keeping in mind that not everything online is as it seems. As for Hester, or whoever she really was, I hope she found what she was looking for. But I also hope she realized the harm her deception could cause. Because in the world of online dating, trust is everything, and once it's broken, it's hard to get back.
Just a kind reminder that we will be uploading our longer 2-hour stories from a new channel called Wideawakehorror Extended. So please, if you haven't already, please head over and smash that subscribe button, just like you smashed the button on this channel. We really hope to see you there for the next upload. Enjoy the rest of the stories.
I decided to give that new dating app a try. That's when I came across Gabriel's profile. Tall, dark, and handsome with a killer smile. He seemed too good to be true. Little did I know how right that first impression would turn out to be. We matched instantly, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Gabriel was witty, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of back and forth messages, we decided to meet up for coffee. I was a bundle of nerves as I walked into the cafe, but as soon as I saw Gabriel, all my anxiety melted away. He was even more attractive in person, with warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We talked for hours, losing track of time as we shared stories about our lives, our dreams, and our favorite travel destinations. That first date led to a second, then a third. Each time we met, I felt myself falling harder for Gabriel. He was attentive and thoughtful, always remembering little details about things I'd mentioned in passing. On our fourth date, he surprised me with tickets to a concert by my favorite band, a show I thought had been sold out for months. As we swayed to the music that night, Gabriel's arm around my waist, I couldn't help but think that this might be the start of something really special. We shared our first kiss under the stars as we walked back to my apartment, and it felt like fireworks were exploding in my chest. For the next few weeks, everything was perfect. Gabriel and I texted constantly throughout the day, sharing jokes and making plans for our next date. We explored hidden gems in the city together, tried out new restaurants, and spent lazy Sundays cuddled up on the couch watching movies. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. Gabriel's texts became less frequent, his responses shorter and less enthusiastic. When we did meet up, he seemed distracted, often checking his phone or zoning out mid-conversation. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was probably just stressed with work. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner where Gabriel barely said 2 words, I finally worked up the courage to ask if everything was okay. He gave me a tight smile and assured me nothing was wrong. He was just tired. But the knot in my stomach told me there was more to it than that. Over the next week, Gabriel became increasingly distant. Our daily texts dwindled to nothing, and he started canceling our plans at the last minute. I was hurt and confused, replaying our time together in my head, trying to figure out what I might have done wrong. Just as I was about to give up and accept that things were over between us, my phone buzzed with a message from Gabriel. My heart leaped, hoping for an explanation or an apology. Instead, it was a brief text saying he thought we should take a break. No explanation, no chance for discussion. Just like that, he was gone. I was devastated. For days, I moped around my apartment, ignoring calls from friends and family. I couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. One minute we were planning a weekend getaway, and the next, Gabriel had vanished from my life without a trace. A month passed, and I was slowly starting to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. That's when my best friend Lisa called with some news that would change everything. She'd been invited to a wedding and wanted me to be her plus one. I wasn't really in the mood for a celebration, but Lisa insisted it would be good for me to get out of the house. The day of the wedding arrived, and I found myself actually looking forward to it. Lisa and I got dressed up, did each other's makeup, and headed to the beautiful vineyard where the ceremony was being held. As we walked into the venue, I felt a spark of joy for the first time in weeks. That spark was quickly extinguished when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. There, just a few rows ahead of us, was Gabriel. My heart started racing, and I felt that I couldn't breathe. What was he doing here? I hadn't told Lisa about him, so I knew she hadn't set this up. I spent the entire ceremony in a daze, barely hearing the vows as I stared at the back of Gabriel's head. My mind was spinning with questions. Should I approach him? What would I even say? As soon as the ceremony ended, I grabbed Lisa's arm and pulled her aside, explaining in hushed tones who Gabriel was and what had happened between us. Lisa's eyes widened in shock as she listened to my story. We made our way to the reception area, keeping an eye out for Gabriel. That's when I saw him again, and my blood ran cold. He was standing next to the bride, his arm around her waist, laughing and chatting with guests as if he didn't have a care in the world. Lisa and I spent the next hour discreetly asking other guests about Gabriel, trying to piece together the puzzle. What we discovered left me feeling sick to my stomach. Gabriel wasn't just a guest at this wedding. He was the bride's brother, and he'd been engaged the entire time we were dating. It turns out Gabriel had gotten cold feet about his upcoming marriage and decided to explore his options before the wedding. I was just one of several women he'd been stringing along, using the dating app to find distractions from his commitment. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. All those perfect dates, those deep conversations, the plans we'd made, had they meant nothing to him? I wanted to confront him to demand answers, but I knew it would only cause a scene and ruin his sister's special day. Instead, Lisa and I left early, making excuses about not feeling well. On the drive home, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I felt used, betrayed, and incredibly foolish. How could I have been so blind? I'm not sure if I'll ever use a dating app again. The thought of putting myself out there still makes me nervous. But I know that whatever happens, I'm stronger now. Gabriel may have broken my heart, but he didn't break my spirit. And someday, when I'm ready, I'll open myself up to love again. This time with my eyes wide open. It all started when I downloaded Spark, the latest trendy app everyone was raving about. Bored and lonely on a Friday night, I figured why not give it a shot. Little did I know that decision would lead me down a path I never saw coming. Setting up my profile was easy enough. A few decent pics, a witty bio, and I was ready to go. I spent the next hour mindlessly swiping, not really expecting much. That's when I matched with Susanna. Her profile caught my eye immediately. She had a warm smile, interesting hobbies, and a job that sounded impressive. I figured she was probably way out of my league, but I decided to shoot my shot anyway. To my surprise, Susanna responded almost instantly. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from the start. We joked about bad dating experiences, debated our favorite movies, and discovered we had a ton in common. She was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I found myself constantly checking my phone, eager to see if she'd replied. For the first few days, everything was great. We chatted about our day-to-day lives, shared funny stories, and even started making plans to meet up. I was excited about the possibility of where this could go. Susanna seemed like she could be something special. But then things started to take a strange turn. It happened so gradually that at first I barely noticed. Susanna began asking questions that seemed a bit off. She wanted to know my thoughts on the afterlife and what I believed happened when people died. I tried to keep it light, but she kept pushing for more detailed answers. Next, she started bringing up the topic of cheating. She asked if I'd ever been cheated on or if I'd ever cheated myself. When I said no to both, she seemed almost disappointed. She pressed for more details, asking how I'd react if I found out a partner was unfaithful. The conversation was getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude, so I answered as vaguely as I could. Just when I thought things couldn't get weirder, Susanna went completely silent. One day she was bombarding me with messages, the next, nothing. I waited a few days, thinking maybe she was busy with work or had lost interest. But a whole week went by without a word. I was confused and a little hurt. Had I said something wrong? Was this just another jousting story to add to my collection? I was about to write her off completely when she suddenly popped up again. No explanation for her disappearance, just a casual message as if nothing had happened. She acted like everything was normal and suggested we should meet up for a date. Part of me wanted to say no. The whole situation felt off, and my instincts were telling me to back out. But curiosity got the better of me. I convinced myself I was overreacting and agreed to meet her for coffee. The day of our date arrived, and I headed to the cafe we'd chosen. I was a bundle of nerves, both excited and apprehensive. As I approached the meeting spot, I scanned the crowd for a face that matched her profile pictures. That's when I saw her, and my heart dropped. The one waving at me looked nothing like the Susanna I had been talking to. Gone was the bright smile and casual style. Instead, I was faced with someone straight out of a gothic nightmare. Susanna was dressed head to toe in black, with heavy makeup and multiple piercings. Her hair, which had been a warm brown in her photos, was now dyed jet black with streaks of purple. It wasn't just her appearance that was different. Her whole demeanor had changed. As we sat down, I tried to hide my shock. I didn't want to judge her based on looks alone, but this was so far from what I'd expected. I attempted to start a conversation, hoping her personality would shine through and remind me of the person I had been chatting with online. But Susanna was acting strange. She barely made eye contact, instead staring intently at her coffee cup or over my shoulder. When she did speak, her voice was monotone, and her responses were short. It felt like talking to a completely different person. Things got even weirder when she started asking about my family. She wanted to know how close we were, how often I saw them, and if they lived nearby. The questions felt invasive, especially coming from someone who was essentially a stranger. I tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but Susanna wasn't having it. She kept circling back to morbid subjects, asking about my views on death and if I'd ever seen a dead body. At one point, she even asked if I knew how to pick locks. By this point, alarm bells were ringing in my head. This wasn't just a case of someone looking different from their profile or being nervous on a first date. Something felt seriously wrong. I made an excuse about needing to leave early for work, hoping to cut the date short. Susanna's reaction was unsettling. She didn't seem disappointed or upset. Instead, she just nodded slowly, a strange smile playing on her lips. As I stood up to leave, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and I had to resist the urge to pull away. She leaned in close and whispered that she had a great time and couldn't wait to see me again. The way she said it sent chills down my spine. I practically ran out of the cafe, my mind racing. What had just happened? How could the person I'd been talking to online be so different in real life? And why did I have such a strong feeling of dread? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the date in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. I checked Susanna's profile again, but it had disappeared. It was like she'd never existed on the app at all. The next day, I received a text from an unknown number. It was just 3 words, "See you soon." I knew it was from Susanna, and my blood ran cold. I blocked the number immediately and deleted the dating app from my phone. It's been a few weeks since that disastrous date, and I still feel uneasy. I catch myself looking over my shoulder more often, half expecting to see Susanna's gothic figure lurking nearby. I've sworn off dating apps for now, preferring to meet people the old-fashioned way. The whole experience has left me shaken and confused. Was Susanna just a catfish with a twisted sense of humor? Or was there something more sinister going on? I may never know the truth, but one thing's for sure. I'll be a lot more cautious about who I meet online in the future. Ethan and I matched, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Ethan was witty, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We texted back and forth for days, sharing stories, jokes, and discovering we had so much in common. It felt almost too good to be true. After a week of constant messaging, Ethan suggested we meet up. I was excited but nervous. What if he wasn't like his profile? What if the chemistry wasn't there in person? Despite my concerns, I agreed to a coffee date. The moment I saw him at the cafe, my nerves disappeared. Ethan looked even better in person, and his warm smile put me at ease instantly. We ordered our drinks and found a cozy corner to sit. The conversation was just as easy in person as it had been over text. We talked for hours, losing track of time completely. One date turned into several. Each time we met, I found myself more drawn to Ethan. He was attentive, kind, and always planned the most thoughtful dates. We went to art galleries, tried new restaurants, and even went on a picnic in the park. It felt like I was living in a romantic movie. About a month into our whirlwind romance, Ethan invited me over to his place for dinner. I hesitated at first. Going to a guy's house so soon felt risky, even if we had been seeing each other for a while. But Ethan had been nothing but respectful so far, and I really liked him. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The day our date arrived, and I spent hours getting ready. I wanted to look perfect for Ethan. As I drove to his house, butterflies fluttered in my stomach. I was excited, but also a bit nervous. This felt like a big step in our relationship. Ethan's house was in a nice neighborhood, well kept and inviting. He greeted me at the door with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. The inside of his home was just as nice as the outside, tastefully decorated and spotlessly clean. The smell of something delicious cooking filled the air. We chatted in the kitchen while Ethan finished preparing dinner. He'd gone all out making my favorite dishes and even baking a dessert from scratch. I was touched by the effort he put in. We ate at a beautifully set table, candles flickering between us as we talked and laughed. After dinner, Ethan suggested we watch a movie. We settled onto his comfortable couch, and he put his arm around me. It felt nice to be close to him like this. As the movie played, I found myself relaxing more and more. Halfway through the film, Ethan asked if I wanted a massage. I was surprised by the offer and a bit unsure. It seemed quite intimate for where we were in our relationship. But Ethan kept insisting, saying I looked tense and that he gave great massages. Not wanting to seem uptight, I eventually agreed. Ethan went to get some oil, and I sat there feeling slightly uneasy. When he returned, he had a small bottle filled with a strange-looking substance. It didn't look like any massage oil I'd seen before. When I asked about it, Ethan brushed off my concerns, saying it was a special blend he'd discovered. As he began to rub the oil on my shoulders, alarm bells started ringing in my head. The substance felt odd on my skin, and a weird smell filled the air. Suddenly, I knew I needed to leave. Now, I made up an excuse about feeling ill and needing to go home. Ethan tried to convince me to stay, his tone changing from caring to almost aggressive. This only confirmed my fears. I grabbed my things and practically ran out the door, ignoring his calls for me to come back. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I overreacted? Was I being paranoid? But deep down, I knew something had been very wrong in that house. For the next couple of weeks, I ignored Ethan's attempts to contact me. He sent texts apologizing, asking what he'd done wrong. I couldn't bring myself to respond. The memory of that night made my skin crawl. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was scrolling through my news feed when I saw Ethan's face staring back at me. The headline made my blood run cold. Local man arrested for drugging and assaulting multiple women. As I read the article, horror washed over me. Ethan had been using a dating app to meet women, then inviting them to his home where he would drug them using a substance disguised as massage oil. The police had found evidence of multiple assaults at his house. I felt sick to my stomach. That could have been me. If I hadn't trusted my instincts and left when I did, I might have been one of his victims. The realization of how close I'd come to disaster was overwhelming. The next few days passed in a daze. I gave a statement to the police recounting my experience with Ethan. They told me I was lucky to have escaped and that my report would help build the case against him. As the news spread, more victims came forward. The scale of Ethan's crimes became clear, and it was devastating. So many women had suffered at his hands, all because they trusted someone they thought cared about them. The aftermath of my experience with Ethan lingered for months. I deleted all dating apps from my phone, unable to stomach the idea of meeting anyone online. My trust in people was shaken, and I found myself second-guessing every interaction. Slowly, with time and support from friends and family, I started to heal. The fear began to fade, replaced by a determination to move forward with my life. Ethan had taken enough from me and his other victims. I refused to let him take my future too. Ethan's case went to trial, and he was convicted on multiple charges. Knowing he's behind bars brings some comfort, but it doesn't erase what happened. For me and the other women involved, it's a chapter of our lives we'll never forget. Santa's profile caught my eye. She had a warm smile and listed interests that aligned with mine. We matched and began chatting. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself looking forward to her messages. After a few days of back and forth, we agreed to meet for coffee. Our first date went surprisingly well. Santa was even prettier in person, with an infectious laugh that put me at ease. We talked for hours, losing track of time as we shared stories and discovered mutual passions. By the end of the night, I was already thinking about when I'd see her again. We met a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Each date was better than the last. We explored art galleries, tried new restaurants, and even went on a short hike together. Sana was fun, adventurous, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I started to feel like this could potentially turn into something real. But around the third week, things began to shift. Sana's texting habits changed. She'd send message after message, sometimes getting upset if I didn't respond quickly enough. At first, I thought she was just excited about our budding connection, but the intensity kept ramping up. During our fifth date, Sana brought up the topic of defining our relationship. I was caught off guard. We'd only known each other for a few weeks. I tried to gently explain that while I was enjoying our time together, I wasn't ready to put a label on things yet. That's when I saw a side of Sana I hadn't witnessed before. Her eyes welled up with tears. She accused me of leading her on, saying she'd already told her friends and family about me. I felt blindsided and uncomfortable. I tried to reassure her that I did like her, but I just needed more time. This seemed to calm her momentarily, but it was clear something had shifted between us. From that point on, Sana's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd alternate between being overly affectionate and lashing out in anger. She started showing up uninvited to places she knew I frequented, my regular coffee shop, the gym, even outside my office. It felt like she was trying to insert herself into every aspect of my life. I started to pull back, feeling overwhelmed by her intensity. But this only seemed to fuel Sana's desperation. She'd call and text constantly, her messages swinging wildly between professions of love and angry accusations. She threatened to hurt herself if I didn't commit to a relationship. I felt trapped and unsure of how to handle the situation. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard frantic knocking at my apartment door. I opened it to find Sana standing there, clearly intoxicated and in tears. She pushed her way inside, alternating between sobbing and yelling about how I was breaking her heart. I tried to calm her down, but nothing worked. My neighbors came out to see what the commotion was about, and I felt utterly mortified. After nearly an hour of failed attempts to get Sana to leave peacefully, I had no choice but to call the police. As they escorted her away, she screamed that I had ruined her life. I felt a mix of guilt and relief, hoping this would finally be the end of the ordeal. But Sana wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of notifications. She had created multiple fake social media accounts to harass me after I blocked her real ones. She was spreading vicious lies about me to mutual acquaintances and even reached out to my workplace. It felt like I was trapped in an inescapable nightmare. The harassment continued for weeks. Sana would show up at my apartment building, leave notes on my car, and even sent flowers to my office with unsettling messages. I lived in constant anxiety, always looking over my shoulder and fearing what she might do next. Finally, I reached my breaking point. I gathered all the evidence of Sana's harassment and filed for a restraining order. The process was draining but necessary. When the order was granted, I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew the emotional impact of this experience would linger for a long time. In the aftermath, I struggled with trust issues and anxiety. Simple things like getting a text notification would make my heart race. I took a long break from dating, focusing on healing and processing what had happened. It took time, but gradually I started to feel more like myself again. Months later, I cautiously decided to give dating apps another try. I'm much more careful now, taking things slow and paying close attention to how potential matches respect boundaries. The experience with Sana taught me a lot about the importance of trusting my instincts and not ignoring red flags, no matter how small they might seem. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed with Sana. The love bombing, the rushed intimacy, the extreme reactions to normal boundaries, all red flags I should have heeded earlier. But hindsight is 20/20. I try not to be too hard on myself for not recognizing the danger sooner. Today, I'm in a much better place. While the experience with Sana was traumatic, I didn't let it completely sour me on the idea of finding connection. I'm more cautious now, but still open to the possibility of meeting someone special. I've learned to value my peace and safety above all else, and to trust that the right person will respect my boundaries and be okay with letting things develop naturally. The dating app world can be a minefield, but it's not without its potential for genuine connections. My story with Sana is a cautionary tale, a reminder that not everyone online is who they seem to be. But it's also a testament to resilience, that even after going through something so unsettling, it's possible to heal and move forward. As for Sana, I hope she got the help she clearly needed. And I hope my story serves as a warning to others to be vigilant, trust their instincts, and remember that true connection doesn't come with pressure or threats. It grows naturally, built on mutual respect and understanding. I downloaded that dating app everyone was raving about. Little did I know I was about to step into a web of lies and manipulation that would leave me questioning everything. The app's interface was sleek and addictive. I found myself mindlessly swiping through faces, each one blending into the next. That's when I saw her, Alina. Her profile picture showed a woman with striking green eyes and a mischievous smile. Her bio was witty and intriguing. To my surprise, we matched instantly. I took a deep breath and sent her a message, trying to be clever without coming off too strong. To my delight, she responded almost immediately. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, jumping from topic to topic. We discovered shared interests in travel, photography, and terrible reality TV shows. I found myself constantly checking my phone, eager for her next message. After a few days of nonstop chatting, I suggested we meet up for coffee. Alina agreed enthusiastically, and we made plans for the coming weekend. I spent the next few days in a state of nervous excitement, wondering if our in-person chemistry would match our digital connection. But then silence. The day before our planned meetup, Alina's messages suddenly stopped. At first, I thought maybe she was just busy, but as the hours ticked by, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I sent her a casual message asking if we were still on for coffee. No response. The day of our supposed date came and went without a word from her. I was confused and hurt. Had I said something wrong? Was she having second thoughts? I sent her one last message asking if everything was okay, but it remained unanswered. I tried to push Alina out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. Weeks passed and I attempted to move on. I went on a few more dates from the app, but none of them measured up to the connection I thought I'd had with Alina. Just when I was ready to delete the app for good, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Alina. She apologized profusely for disappearing, explaining that she'd been dealing with a family emergency and had lost her phone in the chaos. She asked if I'd be willing to give her another chance. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We picked up right where we left off, our messages full of flirty banter and inside jokes. This time, when we made plans to meet, Alina followed through. We agreed to meet at a trendy new restaurant downtown. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, my stomach a bundle of nerves. 20 minutes after our agreed meeting time, Alina still hadn't shown up. I was about to leave when she rushed in, breathless and full of apologies. She looked even more beautiful in person, but something felt off. Throughout dinner, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and giving vague answers to my questions about her life. Despite these red flags, I was still drawn to her. We went on a few more dates over the next couple of weeks, but Alina's behavior remained erratic. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, then shower me with attention the next day. Sometimes she'd disappear for days, only to resurface with an elaborate excuse about a work crisis or a sick pet. I started to notice other inconsistencies too. Once, when we were out for drinks, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen, lit up with notifications from dating apps, including the one where we met. Another time, she answered a call and spoke in hushed tones, quickly hanging up when she realized I was within earshot. My friends warned me that something wasn't right, but I brushed off their concerns. I made excuses for Alina's behavior, telling myself that she was just busy or had trust issues from past relationships. I was so caught up in the idea of her, the witty, beautiful woman I connected with online, that I couldn't see the reality in front of me. The truth finally came crashing down one Saturday night. I was out with some friends at a popular bar when I spotted Alina across the room. My heart leaped, thinking I'd surprise her. But as I got closer, I saw she was with another guy. They were sitting close together, her hand on his arm, laughing intimately. I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right there, but another part was too shocked to move. As I watched, Alina's eyes met mine. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face before she quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't seen me. Feeling sick to my stomach, I left the bar and went home. I spent the night tossing and turning, replaying every interaction with Alina in my mind. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I called Alina and asked to meet. She tried to brush me off, but I insisted. We met at a quiet coffee shop, and I laid out everything I'd seen and all my suspicions. At first, she tried to deny it, spinning more elaborate lies. But as I pressed her, presenting evidence of her inconsistencies, she finally broke down. Alina admitted to juggling multiple relationships, using the dating app to manipulate and control her various partners. She'd ghost one person while lavishing attention on another, keeping everyone off balance and desperate for her approval. It was all a game to her, a way to boost her ego and avoid real intimacy. I sat there, stunned, as she explained her tactics. How she'd use the same lines on different people, how she'd create artificial scarcity to make her targets more eager for her attention. She even showed me her phone, revealing dozens of conversations eerily similar to ours. As Alina talked, I felt a mix of anger, disgust, and pity. I realized that the woman I thought I knew never really existed. She was just a carefully crafted persona, designed to lure people in and keep them hooked. I left the coffee shop feeling numb. In the end, my encounter with Alina left me wary and disillusioned. The ease of online dating had allowed her to cast a wide net, ensnaring multiple victims in her web of deceit. I realized how vulnerable we all are in this digital age, where a carefully curated profile can hide a multitude of sins. I decided to give Swipe Right a try. Tired of the bar scene and setups from well-meaning friends, I figured why not. Little did I know that decision would lead me down a path of deception and heartbreak. My first few matches were nothing special, the usual small talk that fizzled out after a day or two. But then I came across Jack's profile. He seemed almost too good to be true. His bio was witty and mentioned a love of hiking and horror films. Two of my favorite things. I swiped right without hesitation. To my surprise, we matched instantly. Jack messaged me first with a clever joke about my profile picture. I found myself smiling at my phone, already intrigued. We hit it off right away, messaging back and forth for hours that first night. Jack was funny, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. By the end of the week, we had plans to meet up for coffee. I was a bundle of nerves as I walked into the cafe for our first date. But as soon as I saw Jack, my anxiety melted away. He was even more handsome in person, greeting me with a warm hug and that megawatt smile. We ended up talking for hours, losing track of time as we discussed everything from our favorite books to our dream travel destinations. When we finally parted ways, I felt like I was walking on air. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I went on several more amazing dates. He took me to a cool speakeasy bar I'd never heard of, surprised me with tickets to an indie film festival, and even packed a picnic for a hike one sunny Saturday. He was attentive and thoughtful, always texting to make sure I got home safe and sending sweet good morning messages. I started to feel like maybe I had finally found the one. Jack seemed perfect, successful, and totally into me. But there was a tiny voice in the back of my mind that something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there were moments where Jack would get a bit evasive if I asked about his family or past relationships. He was vague about where he lived, always making excuses for why we couldn't go to his place. And he always seemed to be busy on weekends, only available to me up during the week. Still, I tried not to read too much into it. I figured everyone has some baggage, and Jack had been nothing but wonderful to me so far. That is, until about 2 months into our relationship when everything came crashing down. It was a regular Tuesday night, and I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram while watching TV. That's when I saw it, a photo that made my heart drop into my stomach. It was Jack, smiling with his arm around a pretty blonde woman. Next to them were 2 young kids who looked just like him. The caption read, "Family movie night with my loves." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? But as I frantically scrolled through more photos on the account, my worst fears were confirmed. There were countless pictures of Jack with this woman and kids, family vacations, holiday celebrations, school events. It was clear this wasn't just some old photos from an ex. Jack was married with a family. My mind was reeling. How could this be happening? I thought back to all our dates, all the sweet things he'd said to me. Had it all been a lie? I felt sick to my stomach, realizing how blind I'd been to all the red flags. With shaking hands, I texted Jack asking him to come over right away. He seemed concerned, asking if everything was okay. I simply told him we needed to talk in person. When he arrived at my apartment an hour later, I confronted him about what I'd seen. At first, he tried to play dumb, insisting it wasn't what it looked like. But as I showed him the photos and pressed him for answers, his web of lies started to crumble. Jack finally admitted that yes, he was married with 2 kids, but he swore up and down that his marriage was essentially over and he was planning to leave his wife. He claimed they were only staying together for the kid's sake. I wanted so badly to believe him, but I knew in my heart it was all just more lies. I told Jack to leave and never contact me again. As soon as he was gone, I broke down sobbing. How could I have been so stupid? I had ignored my gut feeling that something was off because I wanted so badly to believe I found a great guy. Now I felt angry, humiliated, and heartbroken. The next few weeks were a blur of tears and self-doubt. I replayed every moment with Jack in my head, wondering how I could have missed the signs. I deleted all the dating apps off my phone, swearing I was done with online dating for good. My friends tried to cheer me up, but I just felt numb. About a month after everything went down, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Jack's wife. She had found out about his cheating and wanted to meet up to talk. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity got the better of me and I agreed. We met for coffee and she told me her side of the story. Apparently, I wasn't the first woman Jack had cheated with. He had a pattern of finding women online, wooing them for a few months, then moving on to the next. His wife had suspected something was up for a while, but hadn't had proof until now. I felt awful for her, but also grateful that she reached out. It gave me some closure to know the full truth. We ended up talking for hours, commiserating over Jack's lies and deception. In a weird way, it was cathartic to connect with someone else who had been hurt by him. In the end, Jack's wife decided to leave him for good. She thanked me for being honest with her and helping her see the truth about her marriage. As for me, I was still reeling from the whole experience. I felt foolish for falling for Jack's lies, but also angry at him for manipulating me. Maybe someday I'll be ready to try again, but for now I'm content focusing on myself and the real, honest relationships in my life. One minute I was swiping through profiles on a new dating app. The next I was caught in a web of lies that left my bank account drained and my trust shattered. It all started on a boring Tuesday evening. I'd been single for a while and decided to give online dating another shot. This new app claimed to have better matches and tighter security. Little did I know it would lead me straight into a scammer's trap. I created my profile, added a few recent pics, and started browsing. That's when I came across Kenza's profile. Her smile caught my eye immediately, warm and genuine with a hint of mischief. Her bio mentioned she was a nurse who loved hiking and trying new restaurants. We seemed to have a lot in common. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched instantly. I sent her a message trying to be clever without coming across as too eager. To my delight, she responded within minutes. We hit it off right away, chatting about our favorite trails and swapping funny stories about our jobs. Over the next few days, our conversations grew longer and more personal. Kenza told me about her dream of opening a small clinic in her hometown. I shared my passion for photography and my goal of having a gallery show someday. It felt like we'd known each other for years. We exchanged numbers and started texting constantly. Kenza always seemed to know just what to say to make me laugh or brighten my day. I found myself checking my phone more often, hoping to see a message from her. About a week after we matched, I got a call from Kenza. Her voice sounded shaky and upset. She explained through tears that her wallet had been stolen while she was volunteering at a community event. She had no cash or cards and was stranded across town. My heart went out to her. She sounded so scared and vulnerable. When she hesitantly asked if I could send her some money for a train ride home, I didn't even hesitate. It wasn't a huge amount, and I was happy to help. I sent her the cash through a mobile app, and she was incredibly grateful. Looking back, I should have seen that as the first warning sign. But at the time, I was just glad I could be there for her. Plus, I liked the feeling of being her knight in shining armor. Over the next few weeks, we continued talking daily. Kenza always had a good reason why we couldn't meet up yet. Long shifts at the hospital, family commitments, not feeling well. I was a bit disappointed but tried to be understanding. After all, nurses work crazy hours. Then the emergencies started happening more frequently. First, it was an overdue electric bill she needed help with. She was so embarrassed to ask, but her paycheck had been delayed due to a system glitch at the hospital. I sent her the money, telling her not to worry about paying me back right away. A couple weeks later, her car broke down on the way to an important shift. She needed money for repairs fast or she'd lose her job. The amount was bigger this time, but I justified it by telling myself it was an investment in our future together. Each time, Kenza would profusely thank me and promise to pay me back soon. She'd send sweet texts about how amazing I was and how lucky she felt to have me in her life. It made me feel good, like I was really making a difference for someone I cared about. But as time went on, I started to feel a nagging sense of unease. The amount she needed kept getting larger, and her reasons more dramatic. When I gently suggested meeting up in person, she always had an excuse. I tried to push my doubts aside. Kenza was so attentive and caring in our conversations. She remembered little details about my life and always checked in on how I was doing. It felt real. The breaking point came about 2 months after we matched. Kenza called me in hysterics, saying she was in the hospital with severe abdominal pain. The doctor said she needed emergency gallbladder surgery, but there was a problem with her insurance. She begged me for help, saying I was her only hope. The amount she needed was huge, several $1,000s. I hesitated, but Kenza turned on the waterworks. She talked about how scared she was and how much pain she was in. She even sent a photo of herself looking miserable in a hospital gown. Against my better judgment, I emptied out most of my savings to help her. She swore she'd pay me back as soon as she recovered. I tried to feel good about potentially saving her life, but something felt off. After I sent the money, Kenza went quiet. My calls and texts went unanswered for days. I started to panic, wondering if something had happened to her during surgery. But as more time passed, a sinking feeling grew in my gut. I decided to do some real investigating. I reverse image searched her profile pictures and found they belonged to someone else entirely. I also discovered several posts on scam warning forums describing the exact same story, right down to the stolen wallet and gallbladder surgery. My heart dropped as the truth hit me. I'd been conned. Kenza wasn't even her real name. She, or more likely he, was probably running this scam on multiple victims at once. I felt like such a fool. I reported everything to the police and the dating app, but I knew there wasn't much chance of getting my money back. These scammers are experts at covering their tracks. I was left with an empty bank account and a harsh lesson in trusting too easily. The experience shook me, making me question my judgment and ability to connect with people. When I'm ready to try again, you can bet I'll be a lot more careful about who I trust. I definitely won't be sending money to anyone I haven't met in person. It all started innocently enough with a match on Tinder Plus. Her name was Gemma, and her profile caught my eye immediately. Stunning photos, a clever bio, and interests that aligned perfectly with mine. We hit it off in our messages, and before I knew it, we'd set up a date for that weekend. The night of our first meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. But as soon as I saw Gemma walk into the bar, those nerves melted away. She was even more beautiful in person. Long, dark hair, captivating green eyes, and a smile that lit up the room. We grabbed a table and dove into conversation. Hours flew by as we talked about everything under the sun. Gemma was funny, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We discovered we both backpacked through Southeast Asia. The chemistry between us was electric. By the end of the night, I was already looking forward to our next date. I practically floated home, replaying every moment of our evening together. It felt like the start of something special, but that feeling of elation was short-lived. As I opened the dating app to send Gemma a message, I noticed a DM from an unfamiliar account. Curious, I tapped to open it. My blood ran cold as I read the message. Stay away from Gemma if you know what's good for you. Below the warning was a series of screenshots, court documents, police reports, and social media posts. They painted a disturbing picture of Gemma's past relationships. One ex-boyfriend claimed she'd stalked him for months after their breakup, sending hundreds of threatening messages and showing up uninvited at his workplace. Another reported that she keyed his car and spread vicious rumors about him to mutual friends. There were even allegations of physical assault from a woman Gemma had apparently dated briefly. I felt sick to my stomach as I scrolled through the evidence. The Gemma in these reports seemed nothing like the charming, sweet girl I'd just spent the evening with. But the details in the court documents, her full name, birth date, even her address, all matched what I knew about her. Sleep eluded me that night as I tossed and turned, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to believe it was all some elaborate hoax or case of mistaken identity. But the evidence seemed too specific, too damning to ignore. I knew I had to confront Gemma about it, as uncomfortable as that conversation would be. The next morning, I texted Gemma asking to meet for coffee. She replied enthusiastically, probably assuming I was eager for a second date. When she arrived at the cafe, her smile faded as she saw my serious expression. I showed her the anonymous message and asked her directly if any of it was true. Her reaction only heightened my suspicions. At first, she tried to laugh it off, dismissing it as the work of a jealous ex trying to destroy her. But as I pressed her on specific allegations, her demeanor changed dramatically. Gemma grew visibly agitated, her eyes darting around nervously. She couldn't seem to look at me directly as she vehemently denied everything. When I mentioned the court documents, she abruptly stood up, mumbled something about having to leave, and rushed out of the cafe. I sat there in shock, my coffee growing cold as I tried to process what had just happened. Gemma's reaction seemed to confirm my worst fears. If she was innocent, why would she run away like that? Over the next few days, I found myself going down a rabbit hole of online research. I dug up old social media posts from people who seemed to know Gemma. While nothing was as damning as the court documents, there were definitely hints of drama and toxic behavior in her past relationships. Friends made vague references to her crazy ex-drama. There were posts about sudden friend group shakeups that seemed to center around Gemma. It all added up to a pattern of behavior that matched the anonymous warning I'd received. Meanwhile, Gemma was blowing up my phone. Her messages swung wildly between desperate apologies and angry accusations. She claimed she was being framed, that she was the real victim in all of this, but with each message, she only seemed more unstable. I wrestled with what to do. Part of me felt guilty, like I was judging Gemma without hearing her full side of the story. But a louder voice in my head kept repeating that where there's smoke, there's usually fire. The red flags were just too numerous to ignore. After a sleepless night, I made the decision to cut ties completely. I blocked Gemma's number and social media accounts. I even went as far as to change my routine for a few weeks, taking different routes to work and avoiding our date spot, just in case she tried to confront me in person. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, half expecting to see Gemma following me. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart rate spiked, worried it might somehow be her. Thankfully, nothing dramatic happened. Gemma didn't show up at my apartment or try to contact me through friends. Slowly, the anxiety began to fade and life started to feel normal again. But the impact of those few intense days lingered. I took a long break from dating apps, not quite ready to put myself out there again. When I finally did dip my toe back in the online dating pool, I approached it with much more caution. I always did some light social media research before meeting matches in person, and I trusted my gut if anything felt off about someone, no matter how attractive or charming they seemed. Months passed, and the Gemma incident faded into a cautionary tale I'd sometimes share with friends. I never did find out who sent that anonymous warning message. Part of me was intensely curious about their identity and motivations. Were they one of Gemma's exes trying to protect others from what they'd been through, or just a good Samaritan who knew about her history? Whoever they were, I was grateful for their intervention. Without that warning, who knows how long I might have dated Gemma before her true nature revealed itself. And who knows what kind of drama or danger I might have found myself in. These days, I'm in a healthy relationship with someone I met through mutual friends. While I haven't sworn off dating apps entirely, I definitely approach them with a more critical eye. I never expected a cute guy from a dating app would turn my life into a suspense thriller, but here we are. It all started on a boring Friday night when I decided to download Spark, the latest dating app everyone was raving about. Little did I know this decision would lead me down a path I never saw coming. After setting up my profile with a few flattering selfies and a witty bio, I started swiping. That's when I came across Cole's profile. His eyes and charming smile caught my attention immediately. His bio mentioned he was a software engineer who loved hiking and trying new restaurants. We seemed to have a lot in common, so I swiped right. It was a match. Cole and I started chatting right away. He was funny, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We messaged back and forth for about a week, sharing stories about our jobs, hobbies, and favorite local spots. The conversation flowed so easily that when he suggested meeting up for coffee, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our first date was at a cozy little cafe downtown. I arrived a few minutes early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. When Cole walked in, I was relieved to see he looked just like his photos. He greeted me with a warm smile and a gentle hug. We spent the next 2 hours talking over lattes and pastries. Cole was even more charming in person than he had been online. He asked thoughtful questions about my work as a graphic designer and shared funny stories about his own job. By the end of the date, I was smitten. As we were saying goodbye, Cole suggested we meet again soon for dinner. I eagerly agreed, already looking forward to our next encounter. We hugged again, and I couldn't help but notice how good he smelled, a mix of cologne and something uniquely him. Over the next week, Cole and I texted regularly. He'd send good morning messages and ask about my day. It felt like we were really starting to connect. When Friday rolled around, I was more than ready for our dinner date. Cole picked me up in his sleek black car, looking handsome in a blue button-down shirt that made his eyes pop. He took me to an upscale Italian restaurant, insisting on pulling out my chair and ordering a bottle of wine for us to share. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, and I found myself completely at ease in his company. After dinner, we decided to take a walk in a nearby park. The night was warm, and the stars were out in full force. As we strolled along the path, Cole reached for my hand. His touch sent a chill down my spine. When we reached a secluded spot near a fountain, he leaned in and kissed me softly. It was perfect. The next day, I was still floating on cloud nine. I couldn't stop thinking about Cole and our amazing date. I was at work trying to focus on a design project when my phone buzzed with a notification. At first, I thought it might be a text from Cole, but when I looked at my screen, my heart skipped a beat. The notification read, "AirTag found moving with you." I blinked, confused. I didn't own any AirTags. Thinking it must be a glitch, I dismissed the notification and tried to get back to work. But an hour later, it popped up again. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the notification and saw instructions on how to make the AirTag play a sound. With a growing sense of unease, I followed the steps. A faint beeping noise started coming from my purse. My hand shaking, I emptied the contents of my bag onto my desk. There, among my lip gloss and spare change, was a small, round disc, an AirTag. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Someone had planted a tracker in my bag. But who and when? Suddenly, memories from the night before flashed through my mind. I remembered Cole offering to hold my purse while I used the restroom at the restaurant. At the time, I thought he was being gentlemanly. Now, a chill ran down my spine as I realized what must have happened. I felt sick to my stomach. The man I thought I was falling for had betrayed my trust in the most invasive way possible. Questions swirled in my head. How long had he been tracking me? What were his intentions? Was I in danger? Not knowing what else to do, I went to my boss and explained the situation. She was horrified and immediately told me to go home and take care of myself. On my way out, I stopped by the building's security office. I showed them the tracker and explained what happened. They took down all the information and promised to be on high alert. Once I got home, paranoia set in. I double-checked all my locks and closed all the curtains. Then I sat down on my couch, the AirTag sitting on my coffee table like a ticking time bomb. I didn't know what to do next. With trembling fingers, I picked up my phone and called the police non-emergency line. The officer who took my report was kind and patient. She asked me detailed questions about Cole and our dates. She explained that while planting a tracker wasn't necessarily illegal, it was concerning behavior that they would look into. She advised me to block Cole's number and social media accounts, and to be extra vigilant about my surroundings. Next, I called the dating app's customer service. I reported Cole's profile and explained what had happened. They were very concerned and assured me they would investigate immediately. They also provided me with some resources on dating safety. As the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion set in. I curled up on my couch, too scared to sleep in my bed. Every noise made me jump. I kept checking my phone, half expecting to see messages from Cole, but there was nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The next few days were a blur. I worked from home, too anxious to go into the office. I changed all my routines, taking different routes when I had to go out, varying the times I left my apartment. I even looked into moving, not wanting Cole to know where I lived. A week after discovering the tracker, I got a call from the police. They had tracked down Cole and questioned him. While he denied planting the AirTag, they gave him a stern warning. They also informed me that he had no prior record, which was a small relief. Months have passed now, and I haven't heard from Cole since that night. Sometimes I still wonder about him, what made him do it if he's done it to other women. But mostly, I try not to think about him at all. I'm focusing on healing, on reclaiming my sense of safety and trust. It's not easy, but I'm getting there one day at a time. So this was about a year ago. I was on Tinder, like most people my age, I guess. Swiping, matching, chatting, all that usual stuff. I'd met a girl named Jessica. She seemed cool, tall, blonde, into yoga and photography, all that artsy stuff. We'd been talking for a week or so, and she seemed really chill. I didn't think much of it at first. She wasn't the typical type I usually go for, but hey, she seemed fun. Anyway, we finally decided to meet up. We agreed on a picnic in the park. Simple, right? Nice, peaceful vibe. I thought, worst case, we'd just grab a coffee or something if things didn't click. I wasn't expecting anything crazy. But man, what a mistake that was. I should have known it wasn't going to be a normal date when she suggested bringing a little surprise with her. I got to the park first, set up a blanket near the lake, just enjoying the weather. It was one of those perfect fall days, the kind you get in late September. Sunny but not too hot. I was feeling good, just hoping it wasn't going to be one of those awkward, I have nothing in common with this person dates. You know how it is. She showed up around 15 minutes later. Jessica was exactly as her pictures showed, tall, athletic-looking, and glowing. I waved her over, and she smiled as she walked up, sitting down beside me on the blanket. We exchanged pleasantries, small talk, really, nothing deep. After a few minutes, she pulled out a thermos from her bag and offered me some iced tea she made. I took it, and we started chatting more. Things were going fine, nothing extraordinary, but also not as awkward as I was secretly expecting. Then, about 20 minutes into the date, she said, "I have a surprise for you," and pulled out a yoga mat from her bag. She laid it out on the ground in front of us. I was a little confused but played along, thinking she was about to show me some yoga poses or something. I had no idea what was coming next. Without saying anything else, she stood up, stretched, and without missing a beat said, "Watch this." She turned toward the water, ran a few paces, and then suddenly, bam, she did a backflip. At first I thought, okay, that's impressive. I mean, not something I was expecting from a picnic date, but hey, she looked pretty athletic. But then the worst thing happened. As she landed, her leg buckled, and she dropped straight to the ground. It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to process it. 1 minute, she's flipping in the air like it's no big deal, and the next, she's crumpled on the grass, holding her leg and screaming in pain. I froze. I honestly didn't know what to do. I mean, sure, I'd seen injuries like this in movies and stuff, but this was real. The kind of real where you can see someone's face contorted in agony, where the air feels thick with panic. She was rolling around on the ground, clutching her shin, and that's when I saw it, the bone sticking out of her leg. I didn't even realize it at first, but once I did, my stomach dropped. It was like someone had just punched me in the gut. I've never felt that type of fear before. Her leg was at a weird angle, the bone visibly protruding through the skin. Her face twisted in pain, and she was screaming for help. It felt like time had stopped. I'm not proud to admit it, but I literally just stood there for a few seconds, frozen, unsure of what to do. I'd never been in a situation like this before. Eventually, I snapped out of it. I ran to her side and tried to comfort her as best I could. But I was in a total panic. I didn't have a phone on me because I left it in my bag by the blanket, rookie mistake I know, and hers was nowhere to be found. I thought I was going to have to run to the nearest person for help, but thank God, a couple walking their dog saw what happened and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived in what felt like forever. Honestly, it was probably only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. They took over, stabilized her, and eventually got her into the ambulance. I sat there feeling like an idiot. I mean, sure, I tried to help, but I wasn't even remotely prepared for something like that. Once they were gone, I was left sitting alone in the park with nothing but a half-eaten sandwich and the overwhelming sense of dread. I kept replaying in my head, how could something like that happen over something as ridiculous as a backflip on a picnic date? I didn't know whether to go to the hospital or just bail. I texted her afterward to check in and apologize, but she didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, all she said was, "I can't believe I broke my leg on a first date. This is not how I imagined this going." I wanted to laugh but felt too guilty to. She spent the next several months in a cast, and from what I heard from mutual friends, struggled with some long-term pain after that. I did visit her in the hospital once, just to apologize in person, but the vibe was so awkward, like she didn't want me there, but she felt like she had to let me in. It was just weird. We never really talked much after that. Every time I tried to text her, it felt like the conversation went nowhere, so eventually, I just stopped trying. She eventually deleted her Tinder account, and we never spoke again. I still think about that day sometimes, Like how a simple date could go from chill to completely terrifying in a matter of seconds. It's just wild to think about how fragile everything is. That backflip. It went from an attempt to impress me to a life-changing injury that probably altered the course of her year. And now, every time I go on a date or think about doing something athletic to impress someone, I'm way more cautious. Backflips? Yeah, I'll pass. I'll learn my lesson. Sometimes a horror isn't some creepy dude following you home or some supernatural monster. It's just a totally random, freak accident. You just don't see it coming. I thought I'd seen it all when it came to dating apps, but what happened with Jenna on Bumble was something I still can't fully wrap my head around. I've had my fair share of weird Tinder dates. There's always one or two people who seem off or just a little too eager to skip the small talk and jump into the deep end of your personal life. But Jenna, she took it to a whole new level. I mean, I knew some people could be entitled, but this girl, she was on another plane of, I don't even know what. So here's how it all started. I'd been on Bumble for a few weeks, swiping through the usual mix of cute girls, profile bios that sounded like they were written by a life coach, and a few too many adventurous types who seemed to be on a permanent quest for their next Instagram photo op. Then I came across Jenna's profile. She had this super confident vibe, one of those girls who doesn't need to try hard, but still stands out. Blonde, attractive, with an eye-catching bio that talked about traveling, luxury brands, and living life to the fullest. I'm not gonna lie, it piqued my interests, so I swiped right. We started chatting almost immediately. She was warm, a little playful, and definitely seemed interested in getting to know me. It didn't take long before we were texting daily. She mentioned that she was into high-end fashion, like really into it. She loved luxury bags, high heels, that kind of thing. I wasn't really a fashion guy, but she seemed really passionate about it, so I didn't mind hearing her out. We talked for about a week. Everything seemed fine, normal, even. She was funny, easy to talk to, and we had similar senses of humor. Then came the day when she suggested we meet up in person. I wasn't sure what to expect, but we agreed to go out for drinks at a nice bar downtown. I figured it would be one of those casual first dates, maybe a little awkward, but nothing crazy. When I walked into the bar, Jenna was already sitting at a table. She looked exactly like her photos, blonde hair, perfectly done makeup, and a dress that probably cost more than my rent. No joke. It was one of those outfits that just screamed expensive. As soon as I sat down, she gave me a big smile, and we started chatting. Everything seemed normal at first, light banter, getting to know each other. But then, about 20 minutes into the conversation, she dropped this bomb. She started talking about a bag she had been eyeing, one of those designer purses that cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. She was saying how much she needed it, how it would complete her collection, and how it was basically her dream bag. I thought it was weird, but hey, people have their things, right? Some people collect shoes, others collect handbags. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. Then she casually mentioned, I was thinking of getting it, but it's $2,000 and I don't know if I can swing it this month. At first, I just nodded, not really knowing how to respond. I mean, I didn't want to be rude, but I wasn't exactly rolling in cash either. But then she said something that completely caught me off guard. She said, it would be nice if someone could just buy it for me, especially on a date like this. I thought I misheard her. I genuinely thought she was joking. But nope, she was dead serious. I didn't even know how to react. Like, is this how it works now? First dates are just an opportunity for people to start hitting you up for designer goods. I didn't know what to say, so I just laughed awkwardly and took a sip of my drink. But Jenna wasn't laughing. She was dead serious. She continued talking about how she deserved a bag, how it would bring so much joy to her life, and how she'd always dreamed of having a guy who would buy her expensive gifts like that. By this point, I was feeling more and more uncomfortable. She wasn't asking for a cute gesture or anything lighthearted. She was talking about a $2,000 purse like it was just an obvious thing that should happen. She wasn't trying to hide it, wasn't trying to make it sound like a joke. It felt transactional. I was still trying to process it all. How the hell do you even respond to that? Do I tell her that I don't even spend $2,000 on my own clothes, let alone a purse for someone I just met? Do I just walk out? Do I try to be polite and say something about how crazy that sounds? Instead of saying anything right away, I just changed the subject, trying to steer the conversation away from the $2,000 purse that she clearly had her heart set on. but she didn't let it go. Over the next 15 minutes, she kept bringing it up, weaving it back into the conversation like it was the only thing on her mind. At this point, I knew the date was over. This wasn't going to turn into anything meaningful, and I definitely wasn't going to be buying anyone a $2,000 handbag on a first date. I tried to politely wrap things up, suggesting that we both head home. I was done, honestly. I couldn't believe the audacity of it all. When the check came, she didn't even offer to split it or anything. She just sat there almost expectantly, like I was going to pay for the whole thing and then magically show up with the purse she wanted. It was insane. I paid for the drinks, but at this point, I was just ready to leave. I walked her out to her car, and when we got there, she just stood by her door, waiting for me to say something else. I didn't know what to say, so I just said goodbye. She smiled, got in her car, and drove off. I went home that night feeling completely drained. I kept thinking about how crazy the whole thing was. I mean, I had some bizarre first dates, but nothing like this. I didn't know if it was just a lifestyle thing for her, or if she genuinely thought it was normal to ask a guy you just met to buy you a $2,000 purse. Either way, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I didn't text her after that night. She didn't reach out either, and honestly, I wasn't even remotely interested in trying to make it work. Some people's priorities are just way off. And this was one of those times when I realized it's not always about chemistry or attraction. It's about your values lining up. Jenna's values were clearly somewhere else. And to this day, I still wonder how many guys out there have actually gone along with something like that. I should have known that things were going to take a turn when Joe started talking about living on the edge. You know, those guys who think they're cool because they say stuff like that, but it's never really clear what they mean. Yeah, Joe was one of those. I met him on Hinge, and at first he seemed pretty normal. Like he had a decent job, he liked dogs, always a plus, and his pictures were fine. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another guy trying to get through the digital dating jungle. We'd been chatting for a couple of weeks, and he was funny enough. But there were these little red flags, little things that didn't sit right with me, like how he would always make these daredevil jokes, you know. I'm just living life one reckless moment at a time, he'd say. I like to keep things exciting, you know. I didn't think much of it at first. Figure me it was just one of those overconfident vibes people sometimes put on. Anyway, we decided to meet up for a date. Nothing fancy. I suggested a simple trip to a local art museum followed by lunch at a nearby cafe. Totally normal. He seemed on board with it, but the first hint that things might go sideways came when he said, "How about we take the bus? It'll be a little more fun than a boring Uber." At the time, I thought, why not? The bus ride seemed chill enough. Little did I know this was just the beginning of what would become an absolute nightmare. When we met at the bus stop, Joe was already acting a little off. He was jumping around, pacing like he was a little too hyped for what was essentially a short, uneventful bus ride. He had this energy that made me uncomfortable, like he was trying to be too energetic, as if he needed to prove something. Still, I shrugged it off, figuring it was just his personality. The bus arrived, and we got on. It wasn't a crowded bus, just a few other passengers sitting quietly, mostly older folks, and a couple of students. I found a seat near the back, and Joe sat next to me, grinning like he was about to do something he thought was hilarious. And then, out of nowhere, he jumped out. Literally jumped. As if he'd suddenly decided the seat wasn't enough, and he had to do something to make the ride exciting. Before I could even ask him what he was doing, Joe leaped onto the back of the bus. He scrambled up onto the roof like it was the most natural thing in the world. No warning, no explanation, just full-on parkour mode. People on the bus started murmuring, and I could hear someone yelling, "Hey, what the hell?" But Joe wasn't listening. He was standing on the roof of the bus, grinning like he'd just accomplished something great. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was sitting there, frozen, as the bus started to drive off with Joe still up there. My heart was racing. I had no idea if this was some sort of stunt he pulled off all the time, or if he was just, well, insane. But either way, I knew that it was not normal, not in the slightest. For what felt like an eternity, Joe stood there, waving at cars, pretending to surf. It wasn't funny. It wasn't exciting. It was straight up embarrassing. I kept sinking lower into my seat, hoping no one would recognize me. The people around me were shaking their heads, looking at each other like they were trying to figure out what kind of maniac they were stuck with. Then it got worse. As we neared a stop, Joe suddenly jumped down from the roof, landing with a thud in the middle of the aisle. I almost screamed. He had the audacity to laugh like nothing was wrong. But the worst part came next. He looked out the window, saw an elderly man standing by the bus stop waving at him, and decided to wave back. Except, instead of waving casually like a normal person, Joe grinned and flipped him off. At first, I thought it was just some weird joke. But Joe didn't stop there. He pointed at the old man, then jumped off the bus. The doors were still open, and before anyone could stop him, Joe charged toward the old man. He actually pushed him. Now they'll shove, like full-on shoulder check, knocking the guy to the ground. I was frozen, completely paralyzed. I had no idea what to do. People on the bus were screaming at Joe, telling him to stop, but he didn't care. The old man was on the ground, and Joe was standing over him, looking down like it was some sort of weird, twisted victory. The old man was frail, clearly in his 70s, and I could see he was struggling to get up. I couldn't tell if he was injured or just confused, but he was definitely shocked by the aggression. I was horrified. My stomach churned and my chest tightened with anxiety. This was not the person I thought I was going on a date with. This wasn't a fun, carefree guy with a little bit of a reckless side. This was someone who was out of control, someone who took pleasure in making other people uncomfortable and, worse, physically hurting someone. In a split second, I decided I had to get off the bus. I told the driver to stop, and I rushed off without even thinking about it. I didn't care if Joe saw me go, I just had to leave. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I walked away from the scene, my legs shaking. I couldn't look back. I didn't want to see what Joe was doing to that man. I don't know what happened after that. I heard later that someone called the police, but I was so shaken up. I didn't stay around to find out. I just wanted to get away from the chaos, away from Joe, away from everything. The worst part, Joe texted me about 20 minutes later, asking me why I left. He said I overreacted and that he was just having some fun. He even apologized, but it was one of those apologies where it was more about him than it was about the old man. It was all about how he felt inconvenienced by my leaving, not about the actual harm he caused. I didn't respond, obviously. I deleted his number and blocked him on Hinge. And honestly, I'd never told anyone else about that date until now. It was just too messed up. But every time I take the bus now, I can't help but think about it. The image of Joe jumping onto that roof, the way he acted like he was invincible, the fear in that old man's eyes, it all sticks with me. Some people just don't belong in the same world as the rest of us. I've had my fair share of awkward Tinder dates. Who hasn't? But there's one date that stands out, and not in the "oh, that was a fun time" way. This one was straight up bizarre, and honestly, it still makes me feel weird every time I think about it. I'm talking about Derek. So, let me set the scene. I'd been on Tinder for a few weeks, and after the usual swiping and chatting, I matched with Derek. His profile was a little on the basic side, but he seemed like a decent guy. Nothing alarming, just your average mid-30s dude who was into sports, movies, and travel. I don't remember exactly what we first talked about, but he seemed normal. There was no red flag, not at first. We texted for a bit, just small talk. I wouldn't say it was a deep connection, but we clicked well enough to agree on meeting up for drinks. I was in a casual mood that night, just wanting to get out of the house and meet someone new, so I didn't overthink it too much. The day of the date rolls around. I get dressed, feeling pretty good about things. I was excited, but not overly invested. I think I was more excited about trying a new cocktail at this cool little bar we had planned to meet at. But the day before the date, Derek sent me a text that caught me completely off guard. He asked me if I had a passport. At first, I thought it was a joke, or maybe just a weird icebreaker. But nope, he kept pushing, saying that he needed to know I was real. I laughed it off, assuming it was some weird Tinder humor. But when he brought it up again later, it started to feel a little strange. It was kind of like those times when people asked you to send them pictures of yourself doing something random to prove you're not fake. You've probably seen it. Guys asking you to hold up a sign with today's date or posing in front of your fridge. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely not normal either. And this felt like that, but way worse. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was just being weird or had a strange sense of humor. Still, I responded, trying to play along. "Why do you need to see my passport?" I asked, mostly because I wasn't sure if he was joking or serious. That's when he dropped the bombshell. He said it was just so he could check if you're real, like he needed some proof I was a genuine person. Not that I looked fake or anything, but apparently I needed to prove myself in a very literal sense. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but that just didn't sit right with me. It felt invasive. I mean, I get that online dating can be a little iffy sometimes. You don't always know if you're talking to a real person or if someone's using photos from a magazine. But passport, asking for a passport, to prove I'm real, that crossed a line for me. I'm all for being cautious, but I'm not about to send a stranger my personal documents, especially not before even meeting them in person. That's not just weird, it's dangerous. So I did what any normal person would do in that situation. I ignored him. I told myself he was probably joking or just socially awkward and that it wasn't worth making a big deal about. I just wouldn't respond to him. But then he kept texting. First, it was a couple of follow-up messages asking why I wasn't responding. I let them slide. Then he asked if I was serious about not sending the passport. This guy was relentless. I started getting anxious. I hadn't even met him yet, and here he was trying to pry into my personal life in a way that made me uncomfortable. I could already feel the vibe shifting from what should have been a fun date to something that was starting to feel like a scam or worse, someone who might try to manipulate me into doing something I didn't want to do. I kept thinking, what if he tries to pull some identity theft shit or get me involved in something sketchy? I wasn't about to take that chance. So, by this point, I was done. I thought there's no way I'm going out with this guy. If he was acting like this over text, who knew what he would be like in person? That weird, intense energy started giving me serious bad vibes. I didn't feel the need to argue with him, so I just unmatched him. Clean, simple, done. But even after I unmatched him, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I had no idea why this guy was so obsessed with my passport or what his deal was, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. A few hours later, I got a message notification from Tinder. It wasn't Derek, but rather someone who was using the same profile picture. It was a fake account with a message that said, "You can't just leave me like that, you know." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Was this dude stalking me? I hadn't blocked him, so he clearly just recreated his profile to message me again. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe someone would go to those lengths to harass a person they barely knew. It didn't end there. For the next couple of days, I kept getting notifications from what seemed like different accounts, all with similar photos or descriptions. Every time I blocked one, another popped up. It was like he was creating new accounts just to mess with me. Each time, the messages got more desperate. "I just want to know you're real. You can't just ignore me. Please talk to me." It wasn't until I contacted Tinder support and filed a report that the harassment stopped. Tinder took the profile down, and I never heard from Derek, or whatever his real name was, again. In hindsight, I feel grateful that I never met him in person. I've heard enough stories of people getting in sketchy situations because they ignored their gut feelings, and this whole thing fell off from the start. I guess I was lucky it was just some guy playing weird mind games instead of something more sinister, but I still get an uneasy feeling whenever I think back to that day. What kind of person asks for your passport to prove you're real? And what kind of person takes it to the next level by stalking you across multiple fake accounts? I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out. This is probably the most messed up thing that's ever happened to me, and honestly, I'm still not sure if I'm living in a bad dream or if this was some crazy coincidence. I've heard of people meeting weirdos on dating apps, but what happened to me? Yeah, this was next level. It wasn't just some awkward date or creepy DM. This was like straight out of a horror movie. So let me take you back to a couple of months ago. I was using Hinge like everyone else, trying to meet people and figure out what kind of connection I could make. Most of my matches were either super boring or just didn't click, but then one day I swiped right on someone named Jacob. His profile didn't really stand out. He had a couple of decent pictures, some usual stuff about loving movies, hiking, and dogs. But what caught my attention was his bio. It was short, just mentioned he was back in town after a long time away, and that he was looking for something real. Honestly, it wasn't much to go on, but I thought, why not? I swiped right. And before long, we started chatting. The conversation wasn't anything special at first. He seemed friendly, normal even, but he mentioned that he hadn't been around in the area for a while. He said he'd been traveling, but I didn't think much of it. A lot of people say stuff like that on dating apps. A few days later, we started talking more about our backgrounds, where we were from, what our families were like, that kind of stuff. It was during one of those chats that things started to get weird. At one point, Jacob told me about his childhood. He mentioned his parents, how they had split when he was younger, and that he had a sister who was a few years older than him. I thought, okay, that's pretty standard. Broken homes are a common thing. But then he started telling me about his mom, how she had remarried a guy who had a son from a previous marriage. That caught my attention. My mom had remarried too, and my stepdad had a son as well. So I casually asked him, "What's your stepbrother like?" That's when he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said his stepbrother's name was Chris, and that they weren't exactly close. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but there was something in the way he said it. It was too familiar. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but the more we talked, the more similarities between our lives started to pop up. For instance, Jacob said his mom was a nurse, and my mom was also a nurse. His dad worked in construction, and my stepdad had worked in construction his entire life. These were the kinds of details you don't just casually throw into a conversation unless they're part of your reality. But still, I shrugged it off. I mean, lots of families are similar, right? Maybe it was just a coincidence. People have a tendency to project their own lives onto others when they're trying to connect. Things started getting creepier when Jacob started talking about his childhood home. He described it so vividly, how it had a big backyard, a treehouse that his stepbrother and he used to fight over, and how the basement was always freezing cold. Then Jacob mentioned that his childhood home was in my hometown, the one I grew up in. He even gave me the street name. My heart kind of skipped a beat. I figured it was all weird coincidence, but there was something unsettling about how he knew those details. The treehouse, the freezing basement. These weren't things that were easy to get right. I had a treehouse in my backyard as a kid. I remember my brother and I would fight over it all the time, my real brother who was the same age as me. My stepbrother was older and I didn't really get along with him that much, but everything else about Jacob's story felt so eerily similar. I brushed it off again, but the nagging feeling kept growing. A couple of days passed, and I kept thinking about our conversations. It felt like something wasn't adding up. There were just too many things that lined up, and it was making me paranoid. So I decided to dig a little deeper. I asked about his parents again, just trying to see if I could figure out any details I might have missed. That's when the bombshell dropped. Jacob mentioned that his father's name was Mike, and that he had passed away a few years ago from a heart attack. The moment he said that, my blood ran cold. I hadn't told Jacob this, but my biological father's name was also Mike. He had passed away a few years ago too, though not from a heart attack. He had died in a car accident, but the name, the details, it didn't make sense. My mind started racing. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe I was overreacting. I started scrolling through our conversations, looking for clues, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid or if something was seriously off. And then I saw something that made everything come crashing down. I had told him way earlier on of my biological father's death, and Jacob had never commented on it. Not once. I could have sworn I mentioned the accident, but somehow he never responded to it. It was like he was avoiding it. Or maybe he already knew. That's when the full realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Jacob wasn't just some guy on Tinder. He wasn't a random match. He was family. He was my brother. I started freaking out. I couldn't process it at first. How was this even possible? I had no memory of ever meeting this guy before. I mean, my biological father's name was Mike. My mom had remarried a guy named Dan, which also matched with Jacob's dad's name. My parents had divorced when I was younger, and we had moved around a lot after the split, but I had always assumed my dad's son was someone I'd never know. My stepbrother Chris was a few years older than me, and I had barely kept in touch with him. And there it was. Jacob wasn't a stranger. He was my long-lost brother. We'd been living in the same city, probably just a few miles apart, all this time, and I had no idea. I freaked out and just stopped responding to him. I blocked him on everything. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a huge mistake. What if this was really him? What if I had just cut off a chance to reconnect with my brother, someone who had been out there for all these years? The whole thing still doesn't make sense. I've never told anyone about this, not even my parents. What if I was wrong? What if I'm just seeing patterns where there are none? But the coincidences were too much. The treehouse, the backyard, the father's name. Too much match for it to be random. I don't know what happened, but I haven't gone back on Tinder since. I can't stop thinking about Jacob, and I wonder if I'll ever find out the truth. Was it him? Was it not? I guess I'll never know. This is one of those stories that still haunts me every time I think about it. I'm not even sure how to start because it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but it's 100% real. And trust me, it was disturbing on levels I still can't quite process. So, a few months ago, I was scrolling through Tinder like you do when you're bored and looking to waste some time. I didn't really expect much, just wanted to see who was out there, maybe make a casual connection. I wasn't even seriously looking for a date at the time. But then, as I was swiping, something happened that made me freeze. I matched with my dad. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or maybe a joke. I've seen a lot of weird stuff on dating apps, but this was next level. My dad, on Tinder, it didn't make sense. He was in his late 50s, not the typical age you'd expect to see someone actively swiping around on a dating app. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but I immediately clicked on his profile. His photos were the kind of pictures you'd take on a casual weekend. Nothing suspicious at first. A couple of selfies, a picture of him with my mom at a family gathering, and then the one that got me. A close-up of his face with a big smile, clearly taken by someone else. It looked recent. This wasn't just some old picture that was thrown together for the app. This was from this year, or maybe even the last couple of months. His bio was simple. He didn't try to overdo it. Looking for companionship, divorced, and a list of some hobbies, golf, fishing, watching sports, that sort of thing. If it wasn't for the fact that this was my dad, I might have thought it was a normal profile. But seeing those words, reading that bio, it hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the screen, feeling a tight knot in my chest. I had to take a step back. Was this some sort of sick prank? Maybe someone's catfishing me, pretending to be my dad for some bizarre reason. But no, I knew that smile. I knew those eyes. It was him. I don't know why, but I started scrolling through his messages. Tinder has this feature where you can see the profile's activity, and I could see who he had been talking to. My blood ran cold when I noticed the conversations. They were recent, too recent. There were a few women's profiles listed, all of them swiping right on him, all of them seemingly interested. Some of them had cute, flirty messages. I could see that he had been chatting with them for weeks. Now, don't get me wrong. My parents' relationship had always been a bit rocky. They had their ups and downs like most couples, but they had been together for over 30 years, and I had always thought of them as the kind of couple that could push through anything. The idea that my dad was on a dating app, actively chatting with women was, well, I didn't know what to think. I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just keep this to myself. So I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I took screenshots of his Tinder profile, the messages, everything. Then I walked into the living room and showed my mom. I'll be honest, I felt sick to my stomach doing it, but I figured if he was cheating, she needed to know. She didn't take it well, at all. In fact, her face went pale the moment she saw the pictures, and she just sat there in complete silence for a few seconds. I could tell she was trying to process it. But what got to me the most was how quiet she was. Usually my mom's a talker. She has a lot to say about everything. But this time, nothing. She took the phone from me, and I could see her reading the messages, the bios, and all the flirty exchanges. She didn't say anything at first. Then finally she just asked, "When did you find this?" I told her it was that day, and she nodded. There was no anger at first, no shouting or crying, just this heavy silence that settled between us like a fog. She asked me how long I had known about it, and I told her that I had just discovered it. She seemed to be processing the information, but I could tell something was off. She wasn't reacting like I thought she would. If I were her, I'd be furious, heartbroken, anything. But she was so calm. I was starting to feel like maybe I had crossed a line by showing her all this. Maybe I shouldn't have told her. Maybe I should just let her figure it out on her own. But I couldn't keep this from her. It felt like a betrayal to both of us if I did. A couple of hours later, she asked me to leave the room while she talked to him. She didn't want me there, and honestly, I didn't blame her. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat there listening to the muffled voices through the walls. My heart was pounding the whole time. I couldn't imagine what was being said, but I knew it wasn't good. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually my dad came out of their bedroom. He didn't look angry. He didn't look guilty either. He just looked tired, defeated. He didn't make eye contact with me when he passed by, but he didn't say anything either. And honestly, I didn't want him to. I didn't need to hear his excuses or whatever he would say to try and justify it. That night, things were strange. My mom didn't cry, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. It was not the anger you'd expect. It wasn't even the shock. It was this quiet, deep hurt, and that hurt hit me too. I couldn't believe that my dad, someone who had always been a figure of stability in my life, had been so fake, not only to my mom, but to me, to our family. I didn't really sleep that night. I kept thinking about the kind of person my dad had become. Was this a midlife crisis? Had he really been cheating all this time, or was this just some recent thing? Why had he thought he could hide it? The next day he left. He didn't come back. My mom didn't make him stay, and I didn't push her to. To be honest, I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that he was on Tinder or the fact that he didn't even try to explain himself. He just walked away. After that, things kind of just fell apart. I didn't speak to him for a long time, and my mom, well, she handled it the best she could. I think she knew it was over, even though she never said it out loud. I never went through his Tinder account again, but every time I see an older guy on dating apps, I can't help but wonder, what if I see him again? It still feels unreal, but it's something I'll never forget, finding my dad on Tinder of all places, and having to tell my mom that the man she had been married to for decades was out there looking for someone else. This whole thing still makes me cringe every time I think about it. It started off like a decent date, but the way it ended. Yikes. If you've ever been on a first date that made you rethink your life choices, this one will probably top your list. So, I met Sid on Facebook. We had a couple of mutual friends, and we started chatting in the DMs. He seemed cool at first, pretty laid back, into sports, movies, all the usual stuff. I wasn't expecting anything serious, but he was funny and easy to talk to, so we exchanged numbers and set up a date. Sid suggested a local restaurant for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a casual spot with good food and drinks. I was actually kind of excited. We'd been chatting for a couple of weeks, so it felt like I knew him a little. Plus, I was ready to get out of the house, get dressed up, and have some fun for once. We met at the restaurant, and everything was fine at first. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started chatting. Sid was a little quieter than I expected, but I figured he was just warming up. As the night went on, though, things started to feel a little off. The conversation kept veering into strange territory. He talked about how men should always pay for dates, how women should never have to pick up the tab because it's just the way things are. At first, I thought it was just his opinion, and I wasn't too bothered by it, that then it started to feel a little much. He was getting more and more intense about it, talking about how society had these rules and how chivalry should never die. Honestly, it just felt like he was trying way too hard to show that he was a gentleman or something. I didn't really agree with everything he was saying, but I tried to be polite and keep the conversation going. Then came the bill. The waiter came over, placed the check on the table, and asked if we were ready to pay. Sid took a look at it, nodded, and then turned to me with this weird look in his eyes. It was like he was waiting for something, but I didn't know what. I figured maybe he was going to grab the bill, but instead, he just stared at it for a moment and then slid it toward me. At first, I thought maybe he was joking. But no, he was dead serious. He just looked at me and said, "So, you could go ahead and pay this one. It's your turn." I stared at him for a few seconds, trying to process what he meant. Was he messing with me? Was this some weird, twisted joke? I kept thinking back to everything he said about how men always pay and how it was the right thing to do. But this time, the tables were turned and now I was supposed to pay. It took a second, but I realized what was going on. This dude was asking me to pay the entire bill because in his mind, it was some kind of woman's turn thing. Like men are supposed to pick up the tab every time, and now it was supposedly my responsibility to take care of it. It was as if we were playing some messed up game of gender roles, and I didn't know the rules. I mean, I get it. People have their opinions about dating norms, but this was just weird. I didn't want to make a scene, but at the same time, I wasn't about to pay for his meal. That's not how it works. It wasn't like I wasn't willing to chip in or go halves if that was the vibe, but this wasn't that. This was some twisted principle he was trying to enforce. I thought about it for a second, weighing my options. I could just get up and leave, coast him right then and there, but I didn't want to be rude. We were in a public place, and the last thing I wanted was to make it uncomfortable for everyone else around us. Plus, I was already starting to feel a little trapped, like I had no way out. So I told the waiter I'd take care of it and pulled out my card. Sid didn't say much. He just nodded, like he won some kind of moral victory. But the entire situation made me feel sick to my stomach. I felt like I was being tested or something, like he was seeing if I'd play along with his ridiculous rules. When the waiter left, Sid gave me this smirk, like he was proud of me. And that's when it hit me. He was doing this on purpose. This wasn't about chivalry or gender roles. This was about control. He wanted to see if I'd submit to his outdated, obnoxious expectations. He wanted me to play the part of the woman who was supposed to be grateful for whatever crumbs of attention he threw my way. The rest of the date was a blur. I tried to finish my food, but my appetite was completely gone. I couldn't even look at Sid the same way. Every time he said something, I was reminded of that weird power dynamic he was trying to establish. It felt like he was testing the waters, seeing how far he could push me before I pushed back. When the bill was settled and we both stood up to leave, he casually mentioned that he had really enjoyed the night, but that maybe next time I could pick the place. Maybe that was his way of trying to get back into my good graces, but honestly, I didn't care. I was done. I didn't want to spend another second with him. I made my excuses, said I had an early morning, and then left. I didn't even give him the chance to walk me to my car. The moment I got in, I locked the doors and drove off. I couldn't believe how awkward and uncomfortable that whole experience was. It wasn't just the weird, outdated expectations about paying. It was the feeling of being manipulated, like I was supposed to fit into this little box of what he thought a woman should do or how she should act on a date. That's not how it works, and it's certainly not how I work. That night, I deleted him from Facebook and blocked him on everything. I didn't even feel bad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. I know dating apps and online dating in general come with their share of strange encounters, but this one was just on another level. It's not often that you meet someone who tries to make you feel like you owe them something for just showing up. But Sid, he really took it to a whole new level. It was manipulative, weird, and honestly kind of scary how much he thought he could get away with. I don't know what he expected from me, but I sure as hell wasn't going to play along. Dating shouldn't be about meeting someone's expectations or proving a point. It should be about genuine connection, not power plays. Anyway, I won't be going on any more Facebook dates anytime soon. Lesson learned. I never thought I'd end up walking out of a date because of something so messed up. But here I am, years later, still thinking about it. It feels like it happened yesterday, even though it's been a while now. I'll never forget the date I had with Ying. If anything, I've learned that sometimes the worst red flags are the ones you don't see coming, especially when you least expect them. I met Ying on Tinder. She seemed pretty cool at first, had a few pictures where she looked really happy, and we had some things in common. She was a little older than me, but that didn't bother me. She was into traveling, food, and had a nice vibe in her messages. We chatted for a couple of days, exchanged a few memes, and I thought, all right, she seems chill. Let's meet up. We agreed to grab coffee at a local cafe. From the start, things were a little off. When I walked in, I spotted her right away, sitting at a corner table, looking at her phone. I didn't know what it was, but something about her energy felt kind of cold. But I brushed it off. Maybe she was just shy, I thought. I waved and smiled, and she smiled back. Still, something was off. We started talking, and at first it was normal stuff. You know, the usual, where are you from? What do you do? She seemed polite enough, but I started noticing little things. Like when I told her I was born and raised in India, her smile faltered for just a second. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she didn't expect me to say that. But as the conversation went on, I realized she wasn't just uncomfortable with the fact that I was Indian. She was actively uncomfortable with me being Indian. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were talking about food, and I mentioned that I loved Indian street food. I thought it would be a funny, light topic, considering how much people talk about food on Tinder. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, I don't know about that stuff. I'm not into curry and all that spicy stuff. My stomach just can't handle it." It wasn't a huge deal at first. I get it, not everyone likes spicy food. But then she added, "Yeah, I just don't get why so many Indians love it. It's like a thing with your people." I paused, trying to figure out if I'd misheard her, but she didn't seem embarrassed. She was just casually talking like she hadn't said something totally out of line. I didn't know what to say, so I tried to laugh it off. But then it got worse. She continued, talking about how she didn't really like my kind, but that I was an exception. It wasn't even a joke, she said it so matter-of-factly. My heart sank. I wanted to get up and walk away right there, but I was in too deep. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Was she trolling me? Was she serious? I couldn't even tell. But then she went on. She said how she didn't trust people like me because of all the stuff she'd heard on the news, of how Indians always stick together in their low communities. She even mentioned how she didn't like how some of us always expect things to be handed to us, and how we don't really fit into American culture. She made it sound like it was some kind of fact, just how things were. At this point, I could feel my blood pressure rising. I was starting to get angry, but I couldn't decide whether to confront her or just leave. I'd never been in a situation where someone was so openly racist in front of me, and it was throwing me off. To make it worse, she kept repeating how you're all right though, you're one of the good ones. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to be flattered or disgusted. Was this some weird compliment? I had no idea. My mind was spinning, but I still stayed sitting there. I think I was hoping it would get better, or maybe I was too stunned to process how bad it was. But it didn't get better. She kept digging herself deeper into a hole, talking about how she didn't really like how people from my background always take things too seriously, and how it was just a joke. She even tried to play it off like I should be grateful for her exceptional attitude, like I should be thankful that she wasn't lumping me in with the rest of them. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a bad date. This was a racist rant disguised as casual conversation. She was actually trying to justify her prejudices with a smile and a few laughs. She thought I would just take it. I don't even remember exactly what I said in response. All I remember is that I felt the immediate urge to get out of there. I didn't even want to hear any more. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and made a beeline for the door. I didn't care how rude it seemed. I just needed to leave. As I walked out, I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I don't know if she was embarrassed or if she was still thinking I just let it slide. Either way, I didn't care. I couldn't get out of that cafe fast enough. The whole thing felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was shaking when I got to my car, and for a second I just sat there trying to calm myself down. I couldn't believe what had just happened. A part of me was so angry, but another part of me just felt sad. I don't know if she really thought that's how you get to know someone, by casually throwing racist comments and expecting them to be laughed off. But what really messed with my head was how she seemed to think I should just accept it because I was an exception. The worst part was, she wasn't even trying to be funny or ironic. It wasn't like some misguided attempt at humor. She was just straight up bigoted. I felt sick. I went home, and I didn't even tell my friends about it that night. I wasn't sure what to even say. I just wanted to forget the whole thing, but it stayed with me. I blocked her on everything. Tinder, Facebook, the whole deal. It wasn't a question for me. I didn't want to deal with that toxic attitude in my life. And honestly, I didn't need to explain why. Looking back, I wish I had walked out sooner. I wish I had stood up for myself more. Well, at that moment, I was in shock. It was such a surreal experience. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget it. It was one of those situations that makes you question everything you thought you knew about people. And the idea of being judged not for who you are, but for where you come from. That date with Ying, it'll forever stay as the worst, most disturbing one I've ever had. I still don't know how I ended up in that situation with Parker. It was one of those moments when you look back and just wonder why you didn't see the warning signs earlier. It all started on Hinge. I wasn't exactly looking for anything serious, just some casual chats and maybe a fun date or two. Parker's profile popped up, and he seemed pretty normal. A couple of nice photos, a bio that was lighthearted, mentioning his love for craft beer and road trips, nothing too strange. He wasn't one of those overly polished guys with professional photos either, so I figured, why not? We talked for a few days, and he seemed easygoing enough. Nothing stood out as off or weird. He asked me to meet up at a local bar, a place I'd been to a few times with friends. It was a good spot, nothing too fancy, but it had a laid-back vibe that made it easy to chat without worrying about a formal setting. I was looking forward to it. I showed up a little early, as I always do, just to get a feel for the place before the date started. When he arrived, I didn't immediately recognize him. He was wearing a casual t-shirt, and he looked younger than his pictures. Not in a good way like he was fresh out of high school, but more like he hadn't grown into himself yet. His energy was weird too energetic, almost manic, like he was trying too hard to make a good impression. We got a drink and sat down at a table near the back. He was a talker, asking me all sorts of questions, laughing a little too loudly at his own jokes. I didn't think much of it at first. People have different styles when it comes to first dates, right? Some are nervous, some are too confident. Maybe he was just a little more on the awkward side, trying to fill the space with words. But as the conversation went on, it started to get uncomfortable. He kept talking about his past relationships, which I get it. Everyone does that to some extent on a first date. But he wasn't just talking, he was complaining. He went on about how women were too complicated, how his last girlfriend was clingy, and how he was tired of crazy exes. I wasn't even sure why he was bringing it up, especially because I hadn't asked. But whatever. I figured it was just him venting. We all have baggage. The conversation started to feel more and more like an interview. He was asking me a ton of questions, but none of it felt real. It was like he was checking boxes in his mind, trying to decide if I was the kind of woman he could tolerate. He kept asking me how I felt about things like commitment and exclusivity, but in a way that made me feel like I was being judged. I tried to steer the conversation into more neutral territory, but he always would get back to his own views on relationships, often with this strange, entitled undertone. Eventually, the conversation reached a point where he started talking about his surprise. He said he had something cool to show me, but I wasn't sure what he meant by that. I figured it was just going to be some small thing like a funny story or maybe a recommendation for a place to visit. But when he casually mentioned it again, my gut started to tighten. He kept repeating that it was really special and that I'd love it. Something about the way he said it felt too rehearsed, too forced. I didn't think much of it until he started getting more insistent. He asked if I wanted to go to his place, saying he'd show me the surprise. I immediately felt uneasy. I didn't know him that well, and the vibe had shifted from casual to creepy in an instant. I made it clear that I wasn't comfortable going back to his house, especially not after just meeting him. I suggested we grab another drink at the bar and keep talking. That's when his whole attitude changed. He didn't get angry immediately, but the way he looked at me, almost coldly, told me everything. It was like I had said something offensive, like I rejected his offer in a way that didn't fit his expectations. His smile faded, and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. The next few moments felt like time slowed down. His voice shifted from friendly to a little too sharp, a little too demanding. He asked why I wouldn't come with him, why I was acting so reserved. I tried to brush it off, hoping he'd drop it, but he wouldn't let go. He kept pressing me, saying that if I couldn't trust him after one date, what did that say about me? I could feel the pressure building. The energy at the table was shifting from casual to tense, and I wasn't sure how to escape it. I had already told him no, but he didn't hear me. He kept going, talking about how he was offering me something cool, something that not many people get to see, like I was the one missing out. I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. It wasn't just the persistence that was bothering me, it was the tone. It was almost like he felt entitled to my time, my presence. That's when I knew I needed to get out of there. Fast. I told him that I wasn't interested and I was going to head home. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at me, almost like he was waiting for me to change my mind. When I stood up to leave, he stayed seated, his eyes narrowing. His whole body language screamed frustration. It was like he had expected me to beg him for this surprise. And when I didn't, it flipped a switch in his brain. As I walked away, I heard him mutter something under his breath. At that point, I didn't care what it was. I was already halfway out the door, my heart racing on my own overdrive. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but there was something about the whole situation that didn't sit right with me. I got home, blocked his number, and didn't think about it much. At least not until a few days later. That's when I got a text from him. It was just a short message. You're just like all the others, aren't you? I didn't respond. That text, even though it seemed so simple, was the last straw. I wasn't about to engage with someone who had such a distorted sense of entitlement. I'm grateful I trusted my instincts that night. The whole situation was just off. And to this day, I still wonder what he had planned for that so-called surprise at his place. I'm just glad I'll never know. I had a few bad dates in my life, but nothing even comes close to what happened with Sandra. I still think about it sometimes, mostly because it was so bizarre and unbelievable that I almost convinced myself it didn't really happen. But it did, and it's something I'll never forget. It all started on Tinder, like most of my dates. Sandra seemed cool. She had this quirky profile with a mix of funny memes, photos from her travels, and a really chill vibe. We started chatting, and the conversation was easy. She had a dry sense of humor that I appreciated, and we seemed to click. After a couple of days, we agreed to meet up for drinks at a bar near the city center. I was looking forward to it, especially since she seemed so laid back. I showed a little early per usual and grabbed a spot at the bar. The place wasn't too crowded, just a few people here and they're enjoying their drinks. I wasn't expecting anything major, just a low-key night of getting to know someone new. Sandra showed up about 15 minutes later, and she looked as good as her photos. A casual outfit, jeans, a graphic tee, and a jacket, nothing over the top. She seemed relaxed, and I thought this was going to be a fun night. We started chatting right away. At first, everything seemed normal. She was funny, and we were having a good time. We ordered a round of drinks, and she didn't seem to be one of those people who gets too tipsy after one drink, which was a plus. But after a couple more drinks, I started noticing something off about her. She was still talking and laughing, but her eyes kept darting around the room like she was looking for something or someone. I brushed it off at first, figuring she was just a little anxious or maybe had too much caffeine earlier in the day. Then it happened. I was mid-sentence when I noticed Sandra shift in her seat. Her face changed, not dramatically, but enough for me to pick up on it. She suddenly got up from the bar stool, looking like she needed to head to the bathroom. But then, before she could even take a step, there was this small, almost imperceptible sound. And that's when I realized what had happened. Sandra had pissed herself. I froze. I wasn't sure what to do, honestly. She didn't seem to realize what had happened at first, or maybe she was in denial about it. She just stood there for a second, looking confused, and then started to walk toward the restroom, only she slipped. Her foot went out from under her, and she landed straight in the puddle of what I now knew was urine. It was an awful sight. I mean, I wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that she had just wet herself in public, or that she had now slipped and was covered in it. It wasn't like she was wearing dark pants that would hide it, either. She was in light-colored jeans and everything was visible. She scrambled to get up, but she was clearly in shock. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I got up trying to help her, but she pushed me away. She was visibly embarrassed, so I didn't want to make it worse. I stood there for a second, unsure of whether I should leave or stick around. I wasn't exactly enjoying the night, but part of me felt bad for her. I don't know why. Maybe it was just a basic human decency in me, but I didn't want to leave her in a public place like this. She finally got herself together and managed to stand up, though she was still clearly shaken. She walked quickly toward the bathroom, and I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to decide what to do. I figured she'd come out, clean herself up, and we could figure something out, but when she came back, it wasn't what I expected. She walked straight past me without saying a word, heading toward the door. I stood there for a second, still processing what had just happened. Did she really just leave? I thought maybe she needed some time to herself or something, but no, she was just gone. I was left standing there, feeling incredibly awkward and embarrassed, but the night didn't end there. Just as I was about to finish my drink and leave, I got a text. It was from Sandra. At first, I thought it was an apology, maybe explaining what happened or asking if I was okay with everything. But no, the text was completely different. It was a single sentence. "It's your fault I pissed myself. You made me nervous." I stared at my phone, not sure if I was reading it right. Was she blaming me for this? I mean, I tried to be as normal as possible. I wasn't making fun of her or even laughing. I was just confused. But apparently she was trying to turn the situation around and make me feel guilty about it. It didn't make any sense. It was as if she completely ignored the fact that she was the one who had lost control and was somehow responsible for it. I didn't even know how to respond. I sat there for a while, trying to process the weirdness of it all. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. How could she put blame on me for something so bizarre and out of her control? Eventually, I decided to just leave. I didn't want to deal with whatever crazy drama she was trying to pull, so I paid my tab and left. I blocked her on everything. Phone, Tinder, social media. I didn't want to be involved in her weirdness anymore. A few days later, I had another message from her. It was the same thing, accusations that I somehow caused her to pee herself, as if I had some power over her bodily functions. I didn't even respond. What could I say to that? There was nothing to say. I still had no idea what happened that night. Was she dealing with some kind of medical issue? Was she embarrassed and looking for someone to blame? I'll never know. But I do know this. I'm never going to forget the night Sandra pissed herself at the bar, blamed me for it, and then disappeared into thin air. I haven't been on a date since then where I didn't double check the restroom location before sitting down.